Good morning, good afternoon, and welcome to the Uncomfortable Conversation series. Today we're talking about democracy, faith, and the common good, and welcome to all my friends and colleagues from across the country, from the faith community, from the civic community, and thank you for joining me for this very special and important post-election debriefs, democracy, faith, and the common good. For those of you who may not be familiar with me, my name is Rebecca Simon Peter. I'm a spiritual and leadership coach. I'm passionate about reconnecting church leaders with their God-given powers. I'm all about co-creating miracles with the divine. And for more than a decade, I was a pastor of local churches. I've written several books. The latest is Dream Like Jesus, Deepen Your Faith and Bring the Impossible to Life. And that's all about churches being advocates for transformation within their communities. And I'm founder of the group coaching program, Creating a Culture of Renewal, which helps energize church leaders to reclaim their calling and to grow their ministries. So the Uncomfortable Conversation series was born out of the vigorous call for racial equity that we are currently experiencing, first launched with the murder of George Floyd and then continuing, and not only in our country, but of course around the world, such an important cry for justice. And we've been looking deeply at many issues of systemic racism and resiliency that's needed. And this series was designed to engage spiritual leaders around the country to expand our emotional intelligence and to seek answers and to hear from people in the know so that we can shape our responses in appropriate ways and generate renewal during these most unusual times. So now with the recent presidential election, a whole new set of questions has come to the forefront. Questions on the strength of our democracy, questions on the role of faith leaders, questions on the role of faith communities. Question, how do we move forward toward a common good when we don't even really seem to share a common reality? We know by now that President-elect Biden and Vice President-elect Harris won the popular vote, 279 electoral votes at least. And while many people are breathing a sigh of relief, about 70 million people are not. Disappointed in the results, having cast a ballot for the incumbent, President Donald Trump. So today we're going to be discussing the state of our democracy. Certainly we have experienced a slide toward authoritarianism over the last 4 years. We've seen chaos at the highest levels. We've seen undermining of democratic institutions and ideals, an impeachment, multiple scandals. It would take a long time to list all the many chaotic things that have taken place over the last 4 years. But the question I really have, and I think many of our participants have, is what sort of shape are our democratic institutions in? Where are we? And why should that matter to communities of faith and to leaders of faith? And today, joining me, I have two very special guests. I have Jim Petro and Nancy Petro. Let me tell you a little bit about these two extraordinary people that are joining us from Naples, Florida today. Jim is retired as the Chancellor of the University System of Ohio, retired in 2013, a graduate of Denison University and Case Western Reserve University School of Law. A very impressive legal career, included litigating cases in venues from the Mayor's Court to the U.S. Supreme Court. Pursued public service, was elected to serve as the state representative in Ohio, county commissioner, auditor of state, and finally, attorney general. Jim was the first state attorney general to intervene on behalf of an Innocence Project client and later became a pro bono lawyer for the Ohio Innocence Project. So together with Jim's wife, Nancy, they have co-written an amazing book, False Justice, 8 Myths That Convict the Innocent. False justice. And so they've really been students of false justice. What does that look like? What is wrongful conviction all about? How is that playing out now in our United States democracy? Now, this book has won several awards, including a 2011 Constitutional Commentary Award from the Constitution Project and the 2012 Media Award from the Northern California Innocence Project. Nancy is also a graduate of Denison University, retired from communications and business career. Even though they're both retired now, they are not done, and they've been deeply involved in advocating for and keeping a finger on the pulse of what's happening in politics. And Nancy continues to write about life, faith, politics, and what we can learn from wrongful conviction. So Nancy, Jim, I'm delighted that you're here. Thank you so much for joining me today from Naples.
Thank you.
Yeah, really glad to have you. Would you mind showing us a copy of your book? So in case anybody's interested in reading it. By the way, it's been translated into Chinese and they've made good use of it.
Getting it in the right place.
Yeah, that looks really good. Yeah, thank you.
Okay.
Pleased to have you. So Nancy, Jim, who we have here today are pastors, church leaders, denominational executives, people that are really interested in understanding where are we at. And I'd like to say, let me just start by saying I'm a Democrat. I'm a lifelong Democrat. I live in the state of Wyoming, which is red, 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 red. I was raised on the East Coast. I was raised in all those states that voted blue. My politics, all of that was shaped by the environment that I grew up in. My dad is second generation Italian, so immigrant family. My mom is Jewish, and I was raised with ideals of equality and, things that get translated quite often, not always, but quite often into the Democratic platforms. You folks are Republican, which is great. And so this is good because this is America, right? So we've got folks all along the spectrum. We're not going to debate any of who's right, who's wrong about politics. I think many of us would just like to sort of get back to the kind of politics that we knew, say, 4 years ago. Nancy, you recently wrote an article in your local paper. You said you might not be able to attend local Republican conferences anymore. Tell us more about the letter that you wrote.
Well, it was published in the Columbus Dispatch, which I think is the largest newspaper in Ohio.
Yes.
And it was a letter. I've done commentaries for them before, but they have a policy they can't do a commentary within 2 weeks of the election. And I finally got my courage up. I hoped that the poll lines would be so favorable to Biden that I wouldn't have to do this, but I felt I had to. So I had to edit down and urge my fellow Republicans to break with the tribe and put America first, citing the coronavirus, citing separating children from their families at the border. And then the one that I thought was very important was just the lack of respect for our democracy in many ways, from using troops to clear the way for a photo op to something that really got to us as former people involved in politics is staging the Republican convention on the White House lawn. These kinds of things, were each of these so many ways an encroachment on our democracy. And so, there's been some response to that from former friends and so forth. But I thought it was that important to do it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I appreciate the courage that it takes to break ranks, to be visible in a way that isn't always comfortable. Certainly, as Attorney General, Jim, I imagine there were many, many times that you, especially as you got involved with the Innocence Project, that you didn't do the expected.
No, I really didn't. And that was one of the more earth-shaking moments in my career when I had been Attorney General for several years at that point. Clearly, the Attorney General oversees elements of the criminal justice system, but as in most states, the county prosecutor is the actual legal prosecuting authority. What I ran across was a case where there'd been a man in prison for 7 years. We'd had reason to find some DNA tracking that ultimately indicated that it might be conceivable that this man was actually innocent. He'd always said he was innocent, but this became an indicator that maybe he was. So we backed it up with more examination, a little more investigation, more DNA testing, and confirmed without a doubt he was not the perpetrator. The man in prison was not. There was another perpetrator. in prison on another crime that occurred much later. But the point is, it really shook me up. In my years of being engaged in the justice system, I never would have guessed we could make such outrageous mistakes with jury trials and convict innocent people. And so we began, in my office, we began establishing some effort to make sure there weren't more of these out there, and there were quite a few. And then I began to become familiar with the Innocence Project, communicated with them, and they began demonstrating to us, this is not the only time this has happened. And so I became an advocate for examining more fully our justice system because of the risk of innocence instead of guilt on the part of people who are convicted.
Wow.
It was a wow moment for me, believe me. I was shocked.
Mm-hmm. How many people in the end did you discover had been wrongfully convicted?
Over 600.
Over 600 out of how many?
At this point, it's well over. We're moving toward 3,000 nationally.
Yes.
In Ohio, I think we have probably about 60.
Yeah, you're right. Well, I think there's more, but yeah, I've lost track of some of that, but it still is out there.
Oh, very much so.
The 600 number I talked about dealt with our getting engaged in DNA testing at that point, and determining through about 600 tests that there were dozens of people who were showing up as potentially innocent. I've actually lost track of the numbers. It's been quite a few years ago, but from any perspective, as a lawyer and as the state's chief legal officer involved in criminal justice, I was stunned by that outcome and by the further examination that led us to conclude, holy cow, this happens. Much more than I ever imagined.
I think the thing to remember is it's very, very, very difficult. On average, it takes 10 years of pro bono work to overturn a wrongful conviction, to actually accumulate, to prove innocence, to prove innocence. And so with that in mind, just about everyone who's involved in this really believes that there are tens of thousands of people that have been wrongfully convicted.
Wrongfully convicted.
Many of them will never be able to prove their innocence. It's just not even a crime that there's no way they can do it. So
here we are talking about wrongful convictions and there's sort of this a truthiness, right? Like it seems like the truth, but in the end, it's not the truth. And it strikes me, Nancy and Jim, this is so much of what we've been dealing with for the last 4 years, possibly quite a long time. I don't know about everybody else, but for me, it's become quite apparent as there were fact checkers working with Donald Trump, to check the facts over and over and over, and just the sheer number of falsehoods that came forth from the White House. How does your work on wrongful conviction and sort of the truthiness that goes with, well, this is the guy, how is that being reflected today? Nancy, you've done some work around this or some thinking. Jim, what are your thoughts on this?
I think it's become, there have been more and more instances where people in the justice system begin to understand what I first learned in 2005. So it was quite some time ago at this point. And at the time in 2005, you wouldn't find too many people within the justice system who thought they were making a lot of mistakes.
Okay.
And when we got further into this and the Innocence Project began to develop more credibility and more engagement, it became apparent that this wasn't just an isolated instance. There were reasons why the justice system was making mistakes. And today, I think more people are cognizant of it. Now, that doesn't mean mistakes aren't still being made. They are. But at least there are more and more people who recognize that the opportunity to make mistakes is there, and the need to be more careful and more thorough in examination of evidence is required. So we've seen over 15 years, we've seen some improvement and some advancement, but the issue is not fully resolved, not by a long shot.
Okay, so Nancy, talk to us about the role of perception and
Mm.
politics.
Yeah,
That's the
well,
justice end of things. What about politics? What's the role of
Absolutely.
perception?
If you think about it, a wrongful conviction is two narratives. In most of these cases, you have a prosecutor who absolutely believes they've gotten the right guy. Generally, it is a guy. I don't mean to be, I mean, there were about 7% of these people are women right now, but mostly they are guys. They are disproportionately people of color. This is, to me, the biggest evidence of systemic racism, in that these are the people that were wrongfully convicted. They're not criminals. They've only been punished as criminals. But you have that narrative where you have a prosecutor, and then you have the other narrative, which is the wrongfully convicted person and his pro bono defense. And it is a microcosm, I think of what we are experiencing today. How those sides can dig in their heels and demonize the other side because they're working from two different narratives. And so they believe that other side is either blind, being overly influenced by the wrong things, or are downright immoral. And when you get that far apart, it's very hard to find the middle ground to be able even to pursue together truth. When this happened to Jim, and we discovered that Clarence Elkins, a family man with no record, was serving a life sentence for killing his mother-in-law and raping his niece, you look back on that and say, what were they thinking? The guy who did it lived three doors down. He had a very in-depth violent felony record. So perception is at the heart of this, and it's at the heart of what we're seeing right now. And there are so many contributors to both wrongful conviction and the stalemate we are in right now with our country that it would take several sessions like this to go over them. I mean, we've got cognitive issues that are baked into our human psyche that really blind us to the truth. And then we've got the social media and the new opinion news across the spectrum that is enabling lies to just be exponentially grown in an echo chamber. I see this as the greatest threat to our democracy, really.
That's so interesting. So when you talk about cognitive issues, are you talking about confirmation bias, where it sort of seems right?
That's probably the most familiar one. Most people have now heard of confirmation bias, where you are basically only seeing things that support your theory, and you absolutely reject, sometimes not even realizing you are, those things that would contradict your theory. But there are a host of other ones. Just to run through some that I just quickly wrote down, there's belief perseverance. Very difficult to let go of your belief. It's baked into us. Role effects. What is your role in this debate? Conformity effects, hindsight bias, outcome bias, contextual bias. And of course, the bias that we bring to us from our own experience. You grew up in a Democrat family. I grew up in a Republican family, but way beyond that, everything that's influenced you, basically we're all looking at things through our own unique lens, but it's not as clear as we think it is. It's not as accurate.
As accurate.
It is. Yeah.
And then that's amplified by the opinion news. Is that what you're saying?
Absolutely. Basically, I learned that I know almost nothing about almost everything through this shakening, but that's true of you too. I mean, it's true of all of us. I got down to this. If, let's say your argument is over immigration and you're passionate about it, just as passionate as an eyewitness is sure that that's the guy that did it, even though DNA later proves she's wrong. You're absolutely sure about it. I just feel like saying to people, okay, sit down and write a one-page document on immigration. Tell me what you really know about immigration. And I think most of us fall short on the things that we're very passionate about. we really don't know much about them, ultimately.
Yeah. I felt like I learned more about the election watching county by county, like, oh, I didn't know that. I didn't know this. I didn't know that. And, when I think about President Trump right now, taking the lawsuits and the vote's been stolen. And now all these people that are protesting around the country, they've stolen the vote. They've stolen the vote. And I think, well, probably the news services or the opinion news that they watch never did tell them. I don't know if this would have mattered to President Trump, but never did tell the masses, look, all those mail-in ballots that have been sent, we have the highest record of mail-in ballots ever, they're probably going to be blue. So here's, probably things are going to be red on the first day. Then there's things that are going to shift to blue. Don't be alarmed. Nobody's stealing the vote. This is just probably the way it's going to be. It doesn't mean our guy is losing, but just watch for that. I feel if that had been said, if that had been circulated around social media, there would be so much less traction for they stole the vote. They stole the vote. Right. So I hear what you're saying about this opinion media shaping, amplifying, reinforcing what we think we know, and I'm just going on what I think I know, right? Because I watch the news for 3 days or 4 days.
Yeah.
So I'm of course guilty of the same thing you're talking about.
We all are. And the social media is a whole different ballgame. If you haven't seen the Netflix series, well, it's only one, it's a documentary. It's called The Social Dilemma. And it lies out, it will lay out for you what's happening on Facebook, Twitter, all of these, and how it's a very sophisticated way to influence our thinking and our decision making.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we've got a question here, kind of a reflection. I love the thought of putting people over politics. Nancy, Jim, how do we do that? Is that even possible in the way our democratic institutions are set up? Is there actually a space for people in the midst of all our politics?
I worry about that view of people who are in public service, that it's automatically presumed that they're going to make their judgments based on political considerations and not broader considerations. That's not been my experience. I know now there's always outliers, but I've worked with many, many people who are in public service and really dedicated to finding the right kind of result and doing it even when it's not totally politically correct. And I've come to admire those people. There are people I don't admire, but I won't get into the detail of that. But there are people I really do admire in following the right course, in believing that the truth and the effectiveness of finding the truth is a big part of their job, and people who take that very seriously.
I believe there are really, like, when I look at even Ohio, I think there are reasonable people, but I've been disappointed in office, but I've been disappointed with the lack of Republicans standing up and saying, just as an example, we can't have the Republican National Convention at the White House. That's a violation of the Hatch Act. We can't do that. But who did that? I don't know. I didn't hear anybody say that.
No, it just happened.
It's because there's so much intimidation right now. And I think that as we get into the Biden administration, that'll be dialed down exponentially.
Yeah.
And I think that we might have more hope to come together for real dialogue.
I think that's been the most frightening part of the last 4 years is the absolute bullying, intimidation. I mean, and the irony of President Trump regularly blasting and bullying people while his wife, as every first lady or one day first gentleman will do, have their own initiatives, and hers was anti-bullying. Did they not see that? We all saw that.
That is really interesting when you bring that up.
Yeah, I don't get that. I don't.
He needed to listen to his wife more often.
Okay, I don't know if we should go there or not, but
Sure.
yeah, I mean, just the irony of it.
Mhm.
So, when we look at the democratic institutions, and thank you for the comments that are coming in the chat window, I'll work those in. When we look at the democratic institutions that have been deeply damaged, I think we have to say that the first one has been honesty.
Mhm.
Honesty and truthfulness, that you can actually count on truthfulness coming from the White House. Now, we can all name instances where the White House, not this administration, previous administrations, well, there's weapons of mass destruction, or there's this, or there's that. No, or I never inhaled, or, I mean, there's stuff, right, that all of our presidents have said, and vice presidents, I'm sure that hasn't been true, but there's never been this wholesale assault on truth, like, oh, you just can't trust it. I don't know if this is correct, but I began to feel that whatever President Trump accused somebody else of was actually the very thing he was doing, because that sort of dynamic was shown to be
Projection.
true
Mhm.
over and over.
Definitely. Mhm.
Why was there no independence in amongst Republicans? Was it the intimidation? Why people who had been candidates alongside Trump, who were sort of never Trumpers, just fell in, like, okay, yes sir, yes sir, yes sir, whatever you say. Um,
That's not unusual.
that's not
The president is considered the leader and the final authority,
okay.
and I think we've accepted that as a nation. This is our chief executive. He is the man in charge. If he reaches this conclusion, then it must be based on facts and the input of very smart people who are giving him the best advice. And what we learn, this is not the first administration where we've learned this, but we learn that the accuracy of that viewpoint is not necessarily cast in stone. There are a lot of occasions where the leadership that we're expressing confidence in goes beyond a point where our confidence is well placed. And I think that's happened with this leader.
And I would say I think it's hard to try to ascertain the ethics of the various people that I personally am disappointed in observing from the outside, because I think some of these people, when asked to serve this president, felt I can serve my country this way. I can be a voice of reason. I can maybe influence him. And then we saw people, walk out the door or be fired, or ejected, and replaced. And I think over the 4 years, most people discovered that you're not going to change him. And so now we've got a whole new batch of people in for the last 70 days or whatever it is. But I do think there were people along the way who were probably conflicted every day
Every
in
day.
in what they should be doing.
And some of those books that have come out, I think, indicate that. So honesty has been Democrat. The reliance on honesty, or the assumption of honesty, has definitely been damaged. I think another thing that's been greatly damaged is that the separation of powers, that the Congress actually has its own. Now, I don't know if this just started with Trump. It was certainly noticeable with Trump, but that the Congress, instead of wielding its own powers, instead of being instead of checks and balances, just sort of got in line. Whatever you want, whatever you want.
Well, I mean, you do recall that that the House voted to impeach Trump.
Mhm.
He just wasn't convicted. You recall that?
I do.
So they
Yeah.
really didn't get in line at that point. Eventually they did, but there was a point in time when there were grave misgivings on the part of members of Congress about the effectiveness and the truthfulness of the chief executive of the land.
Mhm. Mhm.
And
Yeah.
that was an interesting battle. We might have wished for a different outcome.
The ultra partisanship that we've come to.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Another
Yeah.
outcome.
Yeah. Let's see. We've got some comments coming in, and let's just see what folks are saying. One question could be asking people if they know any poll workers personally. When we're talking about the vote being stolen, each county is very careful to monitor the votes there. How can there be broad fraud if that is the case. Yeah, so getting at, how do we get at truthfulness with the vote being stolen? Do you know poll workers? Can you talk to them? There would have had to be such a broad conspiracy for the vote to be stolen, especially if we're looking at, well, President Trump somehow didn't win, but everybody else on those same ballots, they won, right? All those Republicans, they won, but
Makes
President Trump did not win.
I've yet to be convinced that there's a lot of fraud that goes on in vote counting. I don't necessarily agree with that notion. My experience with vote counting is that these are people who are community activists, maybe partisan activists, but they want to do the right thing.
Yeah.
And I don't think there's going to be occasions where that doesn't be the case. But I think for the most part, nationwide, people who are engaged in the election process are there to get the correct result on behalf of the voters. And I believe in that. And I still think there's not a lot, there's evidence occasionally that that's been breached, but it's not significant in my mind.
And it's not like they're getting paid a ton of money to go in and
No, not at all. Not at all.
Okay, so that's very good. We have another comment. For the first time in my life, I'm encountering people whom I view as honest, moral, kind, who are fiercely and angrily defending the current administration. It's been an emotional struggle for me. I don't know how to respond to them. Nancy and Jim, what would you say to that? Any responses there?
Well, again, I think that we have to, it's happening to us, of course. I mean, we have a lot of family members and friends who are this way. And I just have to step back and say, okay, their opinion is based on an entirely different narrative. Let me just throw in something here. I had a conversation like this with my best friend from high school, and I ended up kind of just walking away, but she was a Fox viewer, and she said that that's the best name, that most respected name in news. And I said, this can't be true. And I researched it. And I found out that indeed they have the highest number of viewers because they have listened to President Trump call everything else fake news. And so they singularly, a lot of those people, a lot of their viewing audience singularly watches Fox as their main, by far their main source of information. Whereas those who don't watch Fox spread their viewing across multiple, NBC, CBS, ABC, MSNBC, CNN, public television, way across the entire spectrum, and even checking in on Fox News. So you've got two different viewing audiences. We are basing our decisions on different narratives. The narratives are strikingly different.
Yeah.
And that's, I think, the issue. You have to take that in mind when you talk to people.
Yeah, I had heard of a study done quite a few years back now that people whose primary source of news was Fox News were actually less informed than people who never watch the news.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's the result of the actual news authority not having any interest in presenting alternative viewpoints. They're basically saying, this is the way we believe it is. This is the news as we know it. Therefore, believe our news. And that's really not the way I think we want to receive news. I think it's important in receiving news that where there's alternative opinions, we get some inkling that's out there. Yeah. So we're not immediately sought to be convinced this is the way.
Yes. Another comment, hasn't social media been a primary enabler and offender in propagating intimidation and misinformation? What can we do about this? Are there other enablers of intimidation and misinformation? Maybe your cognitive issues as well. We need each to look in the mirror and think about how we ourselves are enablers of misinformation, perhaps of intimidation. What do you say about that? What about social media?
Again, see the Netflix series, The Social Dilemma, for starters. There are other sources that go into it in more detail. It is frightening because it's unprecedented and we don't understand it. We don't understand the full reach of how easily it is to manipulate people once you know more about them than their spouse. When you know more about what their interests are, what their biases are, and then your whole, if you have the desire to foment action, prompt a certain action, it's incredibly easy to do. And I don't think any of us really fully understand that. And that's going on. It's been going on for, I think, from what I've read so far, I'm really looking into this right now, reading some books on it and things. I think it's been going on for, really coming to a head for at least 5 years, you know.
Which in the history of the world is not that long a period of time. And yet when you look at the prevalence of social media, where people consume it for hours every single day, that's a hell of an impact.
We're all addicted to it. But I mean, that part goes back further, but what we're asking is, I'm asking, when did this start to be a major influence on our elections and things like that?
Okay, so we've got a comment here about a new social media site called Parler, Parler. You may have heard of it. Some conservative friends are going to in place of Facebook. Wikipedia defines the site as a United States-based microblogging and social networking service launched in August 2018. Parler has a significant user base of Trump supporters, conservatives, and Saudi nationalists. That's interesting. Posts on the website often contain far-right content, anti-Semitism, and discuss conspiracy theories. Yeah. And I think
I looked at that for the first time. I've just heard about it, but I looked at it. I saw some of my college friends on there. But I knew about it because another college friend raised the issue. And what I noticed, and you people may know more, is they go by a handle. They give themselves a handle, a name, a nickname. So you can't really, I'm not sure you can see who it really is.
Like Reddit is like that. Interesting. And just a reminder here also in the chat window, Trump bluntly said that if he lost, it would be because of cheating. He already preloaded the idea. And when he was first running in 2016, he said he would not concede. He would not believe the results of the election unless he won.
Yes.
He said that in October 2016. He wouldn't believe the results of the election unless he won. So he's been pre-paving the way all along the way. And he is staying true to his character, his morals, his values, and the role that he plays in the public, which is he's got a consistent, for all his inconsistencies, there's a consistency there. And at the same time,
that's what so dangerous. And I think he has been, regardless of party or what you think about it, he has presented a danger to our democracy because he wasn't committed to the truth to the degree that leadership should be.
Jim, could you say that one more time? It was just so beautiful to hear something so clear like that.
I find that I can't feel that he was committed to the truth. That another side of the story, not necessarily being truthful, was not something he would ignore, but rather wouldn't hesitate to use it as part of his advocacy. And that's dangerous. I think people in elective service have to accept the truth and advocate for the truth, regardless of the outcome as it relates to their own political fortunes. They have to really understand the importance in a democracy of the truth as we come to know it.
You know what that brings to mind is the whole alignment of many evangelical Christians with Trump, which really made no sense to me on so many levels, because the evangelical model, as I understand it, is greatly devoted to the truthfulness of the gospel.
Yes.
And that this is the truth. This is the bedrock truth. Well, we're not going to be messing around with big interpretations. That if the Bible says it, I believe it. And so that willingness to disalign with the truthfulness that one holds in their faith and moral character and moral standing, and simply align with someone who doesn't share those morals, doesn't share those characteristics, doesn't have that relationship with the truth. I did not understand that. I think there's not only been damage done for democratic institutions, but within the world of Christianity, there's been a big divide.
No question.
Big divide. And you folks are what, longtime Methodists, are you not?
Yes.
Well, yes, I think we both were UCC individuals in our youth. I know I remember being part of a Reformed church that became UCC at some point where I was just finishing high school, I think. And so I continued in the UCC for years until we were married, went to all the churches in our community, and kind of like the Methodist church, pastor that we found engaging, and that kind of changed our direction a little bit.
Yeah, we're going to continue to talk about the impact on Christianity. There's a good question here in the chat. How do we hold leadership accountable? How do we, the people, hold leadership accountable to an ethic of truth?
Well, I think the election may have shown some of that.
Vote them out?
I mean, let's face it, if we felt that the incumbent president was not being totally truthful with us, then we had every reason to vote for the alternative. And that's kind of what occurred.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
vote him out.
If Trump would have been fully believed in all that he did and all that he advocated, then this wouldn't have been the result.
Mm-hmm.
He would have been reelected.
Mm-hmm. Believed and respectful, perhaps. But what about in the meantime? Do we just have to put up with this for 4 years? I mean, it seemed like there was no holding this guy accountable. There was no way, because other elected officials lined up behind him. And even now,
they did, because those that didn't got crushed in the next election, because this guy is, he was intimidating, and you might say vengeful. I mean, he doesn't forgive you. I mean, well, and he had the strength throughout the country.
In fairness, though, to those who were engaged in advancing what they believed to be the truth, Trump was impeached.
Yeah.
That doesn't happen all the time.
Thing,
So there were people acting on their viewpoint that this man should be removed from office. They ultimately didn't have the votes, but it was mighty close. When you think about it. But
that was a democratically, there was a majority in the House.
Yes.
The Senate, nothing happened there.
Right. And I do think you have to, also the supporters of Trump are a nuanced group, and some of those people really felt that they would say, I don't like his style, which I think is really not a big enough word, but I didn't like his style, but I liked his platform. I liked what he was doing, and he got things done. For me, some of the things he got done were horrific, but he did get some things done. So people sometimes felt that, I've always felt you can't hire the devil to do God's work, but I think they felt that the means were worth the ends in some instances. So,
that's another democratic norm, I think, small d, that was really injured, that the process itself got subverted. The ends justify the means. It doesn't matter how we're going to go about this. By golly, we're just going to get the result we want. It doesn't matter if we lie, if we cheat, if we throw people under the bus, veterans, John McCain, but there is another comment, a couple more comments. Let me lift up for us all to consider. Chapter 19 from Jonathan Carroll's book, Trump Row at the Front Show. Trump was asked by Jonathan, you said, I will never lie to you. Can you tell me now, honestly, have you kept the promise, I will never lie to you? He replied, well, I do try. I think you will try too. You say things about me that aren't necessarily correct. I do try, and I will always want to tell the truth when I can. I tell the truth. I don't even, that's,
I remember all of that. It was interesting.
oh my goodness. So another person says, my parents, far right-wing conservatives, were visiting at the end of October. My dad kept using sweeping generalizations about the lazy Dems. Quote, it was on day 3 that I finally told him that not everyone in the room agrees with him politically. It felt like I was coming out to my parents. After that, no politics were mentioned the rest of their visit. It's too bad we couldn't have an adult conversation. It was definitely a sign of the times. I think, gosh, maybe in some ways it's good that we're not going to be all together at Thanksgiving this year, and at Christmas. I'm just not sure what that would be like. But you, Nancy and Jim, you're politically savvy. You deeply care about truth and innocence. You've served public office, and you're people of faith. You're holding all of that together, as many of us do. We hold many realms, many lenses of experience together. What do you say about that? How do you talk with people where you don't agree, and there's all that confirmation bias, Nancy, that you were talking about, the cognitive issues, all that's in play, and yet you love each other. Maybe you don't like each other so much right now, but you love each other. What do you say to that?
I have felt, especially dealing with a lot of friends who we may not agree with, that there's no real requirement, even for husband and wife, to agree on everything. And it's perfectly appropriate, and it might be beneficial if you don't agree with each other on all things, and yet you respect one another for the fact that they have an alternative viewpoint. Nothing wrong with that, both with your friends, with your family, with our children, as an example. I think we've always given our children free rein on believing and espousing what they want to believe politically. They're smart kids. They've come up with their own viewpoints on things. I've never cursed them for not believing the way I believe. I respect them for it. And I think that's important within families, within friendships, within the American way.
I don't think it's terrible to agree, just not to discuss it anymore. I mean, especially if people are just dug in. I mean, I can tell you right now, I'm not going to have my mind changed on this particular presidency and what we've gone through. I'm sorry, but I don't think anybody could change my mind. I don't think I can change some of my loved ones' minds. And I don't know what it serves to beat it to death, I would like to see the day when, and I think here's where I think churches could really come into service on this issue, because going into the sanctuary, whether it's online or in person, is truly a sanctuary. It's truly one place away from all of this. And that's not to say that we shouldn't be talking about these things in church, but I feel as if we should be strengthening Christian virtues, helping people break out of the pattern of response that we often have, to listen more, to be more patient, to be more forgiving. All these things are just so hard to do. We get reinforced to try to think about those ways to respond when we go to church. We don't get that many other places. So I think the role of the church is very important in helping people respond and cope as Jesus would, not as I tend to do,
Nancy, that's so interesting. I'm really glad you said it. I have to confess, this is the Uncomfortable Conversation series, so I better confess here that there was a time that I thought preaching on love and peace and patience and all of that was wimpy. That's just wimpy. You've got to take a stand for something. And I definitely believe in taking a stand. I definitely believe in standing with and for people, especially people that are getting the short shrift on things. But I do see more and more now the true value of preaching peace, of preaching love, of preaching kindness. I think it's important for it to be tied to real life.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean,
Otherwise,
No, I'm saying it gets much more practical in today's world because we do have to change the tone. We have to dial it back.
Yeah.
And if our politicians don't do it, then we have to do it at the grassroots. We have to make it happen.
Didn't Joe Biden say something about turning the temperature down?
Yes,
Yes,
he did.
He talks about that.
I like that.
And I think that's a good thing to express.
Yeah, absolutely. And then we've got a note here, not only should we be talking about peace and love and faith and joy, but also community. Like we belong to each other. That whole idea of beloved community, the kingdom, where we're all going to be. I remember when I was my very first church that I ever joined, I was in the African American congregation, and the pastor at the time said, "Now, when we get to heaven, there's not going to be a black heaven and a white heaven. Like we're all going to be together. There's not going to be a Democratic, you guys go over here, and the Republicans are over here, or the Trumpers. It's the soul. It's us. So yeah, what does it actually mean to be in community?"
I think one of the ones that is the biggest one is being judgmental. I think we're all so just judgmental. And it's just such a relief if you think about the log in your own eye and you realize you really can't be judgmental on anybody. And it really it's such a load off, and you can communicate so much better when you get rid of that layer of pointing the finger.
That's, so well put. Yeah, it's a load off. You mean I can't just judge the people that I think are wrong? Don't judge me, but I can't judge. Is that what you're saying? Yeah, it's really important for us. Other people have noted here that one person said, in my congregation and community context, my political identity, my opinions, definitely in the closet. And I think many of us have experienced that. In order to serve well, we have to set aside some of our own beliefs and feelings and thoughts, maybe just exactly what those public servants did when they said yes to the administration's request. Let me make a difference. Many of us think our job is to meet people where they're at. I always thought meet people where they're at and then take them the next step, help them within their worldview to be more faithful, more true, more courageous, more just, more bold. That I realized pretty early on, I'm not really going to get people to like just change to my way of looking at things. But can I help them be more faithful? And perhaps that's exactly what has gone on in the Trump administration. And then there's Cornell West quote, "Never forget that justice is what love looks like in public."
Very interesting. I've always appreciated what Cornell West has to say.
Yeah, beautiful thoughts. Well, I want to thank you so much, Nancy and Jim Petro, for being here today. You've given us this really humane, low temperature look at democracy, at the work that you've done when it comes to the Innocence Project, how we can really be so sure we know, and then it turns out we don't know. In fact, Nancy, what did you say? Give us your quote again about what we know and what we don't know.
Well, and let me see if I can say it again. I did realize after we studied this that I know, what is it? I know almost nothing about almost everything.
I know almost nothing about almost everything. Yeah, that's humbling right there. It's really, really good for us to remember. So it's really a pleasure to have all of our guests here today. Nancy and Jim Petro, the incredible work that you've done. Show us your book one more time and give us the title again.
The title is False Justice: 8 Myths That Convict the Innocent.
False Justice, 8 Myths That Convict the Innocent. Thank you so much for your work with the Innocence Project. Thank you so much for being willing to be surprised and for all the pro bono work that you've done to free innocent people and to restore dignity and hope. And thank you. I hope you're going to Sunday school somewhere in Naples, Florida, because you folks would be awesome.
We have a wonderful church here.
Well, not Sunday, mostly. We mostly go to the service, and we never miss that.
Okay, well, you can make a tremendous contribution in the Sunday school classes. I do want to mention that we're going to be meeting again tomorrow at this same time, Democracy, Faith, and the Common Good. And tomorrow we're going to be especially talking about the role of faith leaders and faith communities, given where we're at, given where our democracy is at. We're going to be joined by a very special guest that will be speaking to us and enlightening us, including Terrence Carroll, who was Speaker of the House in Colorado, first African-American to be Speaker of the House. And he'll be speaking to us about Unite America. That's the organization he's with. And democratic reforms, what faith leaders can do to support and champion democracy. We'll also be joined by Reverend Dr. Val Jackson, who at her church at Cameron United Methodist in the Denver, Colorado area, started Good Trouble at Cameron. And we're going to be hearing about the role of faith leaders in upholding democracy and being part of the solution and in bridging narratives so that we really can build community. We'll be joined a couple days after that by Reverend Burry Bessie, who's going to be speaking to us about moving forward toward a common good when there's division in a family, in a community, in a congregation. And Pastor Terrell McTire will be speaking to us about a very interesting model that allows us to move toward a common good when we have differing narratives. And Terrell is with the Disciples of Christ, New Church Starts, Director of New Church Starts. So thank you so much for being here for Uncomfortable Conversations. Come back tomorrow as the conversation continues. I look forward to being with you, to being uncomfortable so that we can get to a new place of community and comfort. Thank you so much to each of you.
Thank
We'll
you.
see you
Thank
tomorrow.
you. Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you, Nancy. Thank you, Jim.
Thank you.
Talk to you soon. Bye.
Bye-bye.